So by way of an overview of the webinar, I think the simplest way to describe risk management is in 4 steps. The first is to identify the risks that your participants will face in the field. The second is to assess those risks and essentially weigh them against your learning outcomes. The third is to develop strategies to either avoid, mitigate, or manage risk in the field. And then the 4th step is to review your program regularly so that you can make sure you're optimizing your risk management system. So I wanted to share that case study. And like I said, it's almost a straw man because there's so many places where risk management could have been better. But for the purposes of where we're at in our conversation now, we should think about the goals of the field trip. This was a geology club field trip. And so the goals were to look at geology, hike around Moab, and probably have some fun and get to know one another. It's valuable to know that this would have been an optional trip. And I think it's clear from the scenario that there wasn't a lot of thought given to risk management. And we'll revisit it as we go. So the next thing I want to look at is what I used to call the safety triangle, and I'm now calling the risk management triangle. Rev Greg will explain why later. That word safety implies a guarantee that we can't quite guarantee on our courses. I think it's valuable before you go in the field or as you're planning a course, back when you're at the home office, to think through the activities that your participants will face in the field. So we typically think through activity risks, environmental risks, and the risks related to people. You essentially have 3 options for managing risk. Number 1, you can just choose to avoid it altogether. Like, it's not allowed on our course, we're not going to go there. The second is you can mitigate a risk by setting limits or using just simple safety equipment that's just going to reduce the risk of harm to your participants during an activity. And the third is that you can actively manage risk during an activity. And let me give you some examples to clarify this. So risks that are commonly avoided on field courses, alcohol, for example. A lot of us have chosen, even in adult programs, not to drink on course. It's just not allowed on the course. It just makes things simpler. We know that people can make bad decisions while drinking, so we just take that out of the equation. Another thing is mixed gendered tents, especially for youth programs. It's just there's too much of a risk of sexual harassment, or there are issues that could happen. So a lot of programs choose to avoid mixed gendered tents. Another thing that a lot of programs avoid is romantic relationships between staff and students. They just, maybe you can get together after the program ends, but that's not allowed during the program. And risks that are avoided are typically managed through policy. You just make a blanket policy, this is not allowed on our program. So there's sort of 3 levels of review that happen after a course. The first is the informal review, where you sit down after your course and you think about what went well and what didn't go well. And this just might be you sitting back with a cup of coffee or a beer, thinking through your program. Ooh, that was a little awkward, this was good, that was bad. And making notes for yourself for what's changed. And the second is a little bit more formal. It's either your group of instructors or your administration sitting down after every course and saying what went well, what didn't go well. Some of that might be qualitative, just a discussion, but hopefully some of that is also quantitative. How many incidents did we have? What types of incidents? Where were there places where things felt a little unsafe? Where were things that students were out of their comfort zones?